Hello and welcome to Graphic Novelties, specifically kind of a sub-series or initiative within Graphic Novelties, within which I will be exploring the back catalogue of Batman graphic novels. Sorry to interrupt my own intro, but I actually said back catalogue there, but it sounded like I misspoke, and Bat Catalogue is a really good name for this series, so this series is now called Bat Catalogue. We are here today to talk a little bit about Zero Year. However, before I do, first of all, I want to give a quick overview of the way I'm going to be approaching this and the context of these kind of forthcoming Batman reviews. So many years ago, when I was but a wee new adult, and I had my first job, which was at a newsagent's, I saw that a company called Eaglemoss was beginning a monthly subscription to a thing called The Legend of Batman, which would net you 2 graphic novels a month. And the idea of The Legend of Batman, for those unaware, was basically building up a collection of the most important stories of Batman's life in chronological order. And by chronological order, because this is comics, I do need to continue to elaborate. We are talking like the earliest stuff is based on early periods in Bruce Wayne's life, and it goes all the way up to the later stuff like The Dark Knight Returns and whatever year 100 is. I have no idea what that is, but I do own it. And that's the fun thing about this collection, because I was new to having disposable income. I very much wanted to get into comics. I feel like I'm now at a point where I have sufficiently gotten into comics. But I very quickly fell behind on these monthly installments of Batman, and so I've never read most of them. And because I have all of these physical Batman comics, when I've been reading, these comics on DC Universe Infinite specifically, also Marvel Unlimited, but that's not what we're talking about here. I've avoided Batman for the most part, at least pre-Rebirth Batman, because this was before the Rebirth era. Because why would I read a digital version of a comic that I own physically, you know? As much as I love reading digital comics on my iPad, don't get me wrong, like, I'm happy to gush about how much I love that as an activity and as an accessible approach to reading comics in a way that's not going to cost you millions of pounds. Obviously physical is better. And I've kind of held off of reading these comics for a long time because I've wanted to do this kind of review series while I do it, and I am nothing if not a procrastinator. But my DC Comics and Batman hyperfixation is at an all-time high, so we're gonna do this, damn it. No more false starts, and that's an important thing to note here. I have attempted this twice before, which means that if we are starting with Zero Year, that also means I am overly familiar with it and a little bored of it, so I might be approaching this review with the bias of viewing this story as something that has been this thing that I've got to get out of the way so I can start it and do it and get to the others. Also, I guess real quick, I should mention, when I say I've mostly avoided Batman, I have read most of New 52 Batman, if not all of New 52 Batman, kind of before I started collecting this collection. So I do have some, and I have some general Batman knowledge as well. But yes, Zero Year by the frankly OP combo that is Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo is kind of the New 52's version of Batman's origin story. And it's a great story. It focuses mostly on the Riddler, and I feel like the Riddler nowadays is, he's one of those villains that really excelled in probably like the golden age and silver age of comics, right? But when you try and adapt that character into a slightly more realistic, slightly more gritty modern day of comics, he's often just portrayed as a bit of a chud, a bit of a punchline, a bit of a, this is a has-been. And so I think it's quite appropriate to have him be one of the earliest villains here in Zero Year that Batman ever faces, because with that context, he would be one of the earlier villains in Batman's, rogues gallery, that's the term, isn't it? And he's cheesy and flamboyant and campy, but he's also very dangerous, and I do enjoy that about him. He is portrayed as dangerously competent within this story. Maybe a little too competent, because I guess we can't really talk about this story too much without eventually getting into what I don't like about it. And that's mostly just the fact that I don't like it as an origin story. I mean, it's not even really an origin story for Batman. It feels like, while we do have panels dedicated to how Bruce Wayne became Batman, you know, the death of his parents, him suffering with grief, going out, traveling the world, training, becoming Batman. We see early Batcaves. We see his early relationship with Alfred, and Alfred kind of asking him not to do the Batman thing because it's silly and dangerous and so on. We get some of that stuff that we expect. But I just think that when I picture a first Batman adventure, I feel like that doesn't pair with the story we get with the Riddler here, with the scale of it, with him taking over Gotham and transforming it and flooding it and transforming it into this almost post-apocalyptic wasteland. It almost feels too big for its boots to me, if that makes sense. As I've mentioned, it's a great story. I just don't think that this story should have happened as Batman's first story for the New 52. And of course, this wasn't in publication order his first story. That was the Court of Owls in terms of the New 52, I believe. And this came later. And I think when you read it in that order, the Court of Owls, and then is it like the City of Owls or something after that? And then there's the Death of the Family, right? Or yeah, the Death of the Family. I think this comes after that in terms of like if you're doing the trade paperback thing, that's the order of things. And I remember that was the context within which I originally read Zero Year, and I really enjoyed it in that context. But as the context of you've got this entire Legend of Batman collection and you start with Zero Year, it almost feels too reinventive for the sake of being reinventive. I feel like what I want out of this story is what Year 1 is probably going to give me. Year 1 is an interesting one, and I'll talk about that more when I review it, because I've only seen the animated movie and I don't know how much that changed. But when I think of a first Batman story, obviously I think of Batman Year 1, I think of Batman Begins. I kind of think of The Batman as well, the new one, the newest movie that's come out. And obviously it's been done to death, and that's why we're not doing it again, but like, I picture Batman taking down groups of thugs who are like, "Did you hear? There's a guy running around dressed as a bat. He's taking people out." And, you know, Batman versus the GCPD and stuff like that. One thing that was a bit reinventive about this novel, graphic novel, that I really liked was Bruce's relationship with Jim Gordon being negative to begin with. Usually in Batman canon, Jim Gordon either has nothing to do with a young Bruce Wayne or is kind of like this protective figure who is called out to the shooting of his parents and, you know, gives him his coat and stuff. I like the retooling of that story to have Bruce witness what looks to him to be a bribe, but from Jim Gordon's perspective, he's a new cop in Gotham City. He doesn't quite understand that he's just been bribed. At least I think that's how that went. And then as Batman and Jim Gordon end up working together, Batman learns more about the actual chain of events which happened. But a lot of it is stuff like, I roll my eyes so hard at the beginning of this story, and this could just be a I've started Zero Year too many times problem. The fact that we open with Batman on a motorbike looking all rugged in a post-apocalyptic looking Gotham, and some kids talking to him like, "We haven't seen you since he killed the city." You as a reader are meant to be like, "Whoa, this is all so strange and unfamiliar. What's going on here? This isn't what I would expect from an early Batman story." It feels too transparent for me. It feels like it's trying too hard. And I get this sense pervading throughout a fair chunk of this graphic novel, I'm afraid. Again, that's probably just I've read it too many times compared to other Batman comics, and I just want to get this out of the way so that I can read the rest of The Legend of Batman and get on with this project. But it is also my honest opinion. Now, the Riddler is not the only bad guy we get in this story. We also meet Dr. Death, who, until recording this video, I thought was a 0 Year exclusive character. But upon looking him up to make sure I got his name right, I learned that actually he's traditionally the first villain that Batman faces in his story, or at least one of the first, and I think that's a really cool idea. There is also a surprising amount of body horror in the New 52 run of Batman specifically, and Dr. Death is no exception to that rule. The idea of experimenting on bone regrowth and having it go wrong and having your bones constantly regrow when broken in like these horrific bone tree-esque ways is such a cool concept for a villain. And the way Greg Capullo draws him is just so freaky. It's almost supernatural. This doesn't look like something that used to be a human. We also have, right at the very start, the Red Hood gang. And with Red Hood 1, we get a potential origin story for the Joker. And of course, we don't want a solid, concrete origin story for the Joker. In fact, I've heard criticism about the whole Free Jokers plotline, which happens later, and I'm going to guess that they went ahead and gave the Joker free origin stories, this being one of them. However, from where I'm sat, the whole Red Hood thing, him falling into a vat of chemicals, and we're like, oh, that's probably the Joker later. I like that. The idea that it's not, you're never quite certain, but even if it is him, we don't know who Red Hood 1 is. And we don't really get a backstory for them, so it kind of still works as a no backstory thing for the Joker. I know that this particular part of Zero Year is going to be adapted into the upcoming Lego Batman video game, which I'm pretty excited about. That looks cool. But yeah, it's quite a fun and unique spin for like an early Batman villain, I think, this Red Hood gang. I like it a lot. I think it's great. I also kind of love, at face value, how this entire book is coloured. You've got all of these like neon electric colours that you wouldn't expect out of a story set in Gotham. And when I say I kind of like it at face value, I think it's the same issue I have with this being not necessarily an origin story, but you know what I mean, one of Batman's first adventures. Because while I do love how this book looks, I also don't think it does a good job of setting the tone of the kind of world that we're stepping into. And I think to wrap a bow on it, on my thoughts of Zero Year as a whole, I think in trying to be so reinventive for an early Batman story, it forgets that in being an early Batman story, it is supposed to set a promise of intention for the world that we are stepping into, and just the scope of events that Batman's going to be dealing with outside of like rare comic crossovers and big shake-up events like what I've heard goes on in No Man's Land and stuff like that. I don't know, am I overthinking this? I might be overthinking this. Either way, Zero Year is a great story. I'm excited to have now given you my thoughts on it, and I am ready to continue onwards with the Legend of Batman reading order, and so I hope you will join me next time when we will be discussing Batman Year 1, which is probably what I've been looking for in terms of an early Batman story. Cool, right, now that's out of the way. Anyone who's been following me for long enough might remember a very similar video to this one, and that's because I did, as I mentioned, try to start this Legend of Batman read-through review project before, except I was far too, analysing every panel about it. The idea was that I would read an issue, I would stop, I would talk about the issue, and then I would go on to the next one, which is, you know, it's kind of similar to my thoughts per episode structure. But the problem was, first of all, that was too active of a stop-start, talk about it, stop-start, talk about it. But also I got too into it, and I started talking about every single page, every single panel, and I was telling you all about everything which happened in the comic, and I was kind of doing a big old breakdown of, every single panel, and yeah. It was a bit much. That video is just for part 1, and it's like an hour long. And I tried to listen back to it just to refresh my memory on part 1 before going ahead with part 2. And, oh boy. Yeah, even listening back to it, it's a bit much. So I'm much happier to just kind of do this. I've read the book, I will now tell you about it. Traditional review style video instead of going extreme on it. Honestly, what I was doing would probably befit a live stream style thing more, but at that point you have to worry about copyright because you're just showing and telling the story, and are you contributing your anyway, that's it for this video. If you're excited at the prospect of future Batman reviews, please feel free to subscribe so that you get them in your inbox. Beyond that, for this channel, it's been like a month since I've uploaded anything, and that's purely because I'm reading The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson for my next book review, and that's a big one. That's a big old shonker. And I'm also very slowly making my way through the Sunita novella Dregs of Empire. Do I even know the title? Anyway, the one that focuses on Lorien Aristides, and I'm having a really good time with it, but I'm also taking my sweet ass time with it because I know that I want to kind of wait until the last Sunita book is out before I really dive into those final two novels, which I am expecting to love. Beyond that, I've mostly just been reading DC Comics, and hey, I figured, why not finally start this review series? So anyway, that's a long rambling intro. Cheers. I never say cheers. Cheers. See you in the next one.